So let's talk a little bit about amp care and maintenance. With any tube amp, which all crank amps are tube amps, there's a few procedures to go through that'll help create a little bit more longevity in the tubes. It's better for the circuitry on the amp itself. With all full tube amps, you're gonna have a power and a standby. Basically, it's just a good idea to let an amp warm up for 30 to 60 seconds before you turn the standby off to start actually playing on the amp. Same thing when you turn the amp off. Always good to put it on standby, let the amp cool down a little bit before you turn it off. In the case of the Rev Plus and the Krankenstein Plus, we actually use 6550 tubes in the back for the power section, which run a little bit hotter than the 5881s that are in the Chadwick and the Rev Juniors. Let's take a look in the back. So at some point you will need to change the tubes on your amp, depending on usage. Typically 6 months to a year, depending on how much you use the amp. When you do change the tubes out, you're probably going to want to replace them with the same ones that were in there. If you don't, what you're going to have to do is rebias the head, basically recalibrating the voltage for whatever tube you want to put in. In the case of the Rev Plus, which we have here, you can use any tube actually, from a KT88 down to a EL34. However, every time you're going to change to a different tube, you will have to rebias. And we suggest that you take it into a service center or a certified tech to have this done. It's not something you can readily do at home. To change your tubes out, basically you remove the back grill plate and gently rock the tubes out. You pull it out, you see they fit perfectly into the socket in a certain way. One of the things when you're changing the tubes, you definitely want to have the amp cool down. Like I said, these 6550 tubes get really hot. It can burn your skin. It's something that you want to be very careful with. We recommend that you take great care in changing the tubes out. Another thing to be careful of when you remove the tubes is to not break the glass from the base of the tube. Doing this can cause a lot of problems in the socket, in which you have to take it in and have a tech remove it anyway. It's a little bit more costly to do that. Another good tip is to always have some spare fuses for this amp. Basically, the fuse holder is in this part of the amp. You never know when you're going to have a fuse go down on you in a live situation or whatnot. Also, these amps are set up for worldwide voltage. With just a flick of the switch here, you do need to have the correct fuse for whichever voltage you're going to be using, and you do need to refer to the owner's manual for that. For owners of the SST and the Rev Junior, you'll notice there are no standbys on those amps. The Rev Junior is actually what we call a fixed bias amp, meaning that it always has the same current bias and doesn't need a standby. Also on the Rev SST, it has a solid state power section, meaning you won't need a standby at all, because it's a digital power amp. One thing you should always be aware of on any tube amp is the ohm selector. And you want to match whatever the amp setting is to whatever the cabinet setting is for ohms. On all of our crank cabinets, they're all come in 16 ohm cabinets, meaning if you're only going to run one cabinet, you're going to want to set the ohms on 16. However, if you're going to run a full stack, you'll actually half the ohmage by doing that, meaning you will need to put the ohm selector down to 8. Basically, anytime you double the power, you half the ohms. That's the rule of thumb. Also for the owners of the Rev Plus and the Krankenstein Plus, if you're only going to use one cabinet, you want to plug into the #1 speaker output, as that is the default output for this amp. If you try to plug into the #2, you won't hear anything. Only use the #2 with a second cabinet. Also to remember on any tube amp, you always need to keep a load on the speakers. Basically, that means you need to always have the speaker plugged in when you have the amp off a standby. Failure to do that could actually roast the amp, resulting in you having to send your amp back to us, which is costly and is not under warranty repair. All the crank tube amps come with a limited lifetime warning, meaning that any part that fails on the amp through normal use, send it back in to us, we will replace it for free. This does not include tubes or fuses, as those are common wear items. If you have any other questions about the amps, please feel free to contact us, 188-CRANK-IT, listen for the tech line number, or email us at tech@crankamps.com.